When we turn 18, the government and society views us as adults. But do our minds always get the memo? A recent study may have found the answer to the difficult question, when can adolescents think like adults? I'm here with one of the co-authors and Pitt professor, Beatriz Luna, to talk about the findings. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Heather.
So let's talk a little bit first about your background. What do you do and how did you get involved in this study?
Well, I'm a developmental cognitive neuroscientist. And for more than 20 years, I've been trying to understand that transition from adolescence to adulthood.
Yes.
When do we become adults? You know, because obviously implications for legislation, but also a time when mental illness all of a sudden switches on.
Well, and this is so important. We've all gone through those teenage years, and we know how difficult and all the wrong decisions that we may have made along the way. So, what kind of questions do you often get from parents of the teenage patients that you see?
Well, a lot of people are asking me, why are my kids acting like this?
Right.
Why are they making those decisions?
Yeah.
And there are a couple of things that are very important to understand. One, yes, what we found in this recent study is that you don't reach adult levels of stable thinking and cognition until you're 18 or 20. But before that, you do have access to it. And when you're an adolescent, it's the first time when you're like, oh, wow, I have access to this, planning and so forth, but it is completely driven by heightened emotions and impulsivity, which is what the brain needs at that time to be able to sculpt itself.
Well, so it's so interesting. I was talking to you before the show started about this documentary that I'd watched, and it's along the same lines of what you guys were actually looking at in your study, having to deal with the frontal cortex and when that fully develops. So can you tell us more about that?
Oh yeah, we've been studying the brain for a very, very long time. And yes, prefrontal cortex, as well as other parts of the brain, including the limbic system inside of the brain where emotions and rewards are processed, takes a really long time to stop changing.
Right.
And this is very important. So in adolescence, you've grown to as tall as you're going to be. You have everything that you've ever going to need. Now the brain is saying, okay, I'm going to make you do some crazy things so you can get your own experiences. I need that to make some important decisions about who you're going to be as an adult. So we see that with prefrontal cortex. It's already there. They have access to it. But there's all this refinement that continues to occur even into the 30s.
So this is the part of our brain that helps us make the right decisions based on all of the information that we have?
Yes, and it provides control, like in your the other segment, emotional control. So it's called top-down control.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so tell us more about the study that you actually did. Were you working one-on-one with adolescents? Were you asking questions? How did it work?
Well, so I have been doing this for a long time in specific studies with like hundreds of people. So Brendan Turbo-Clemens, he is the senior author. When he was a grad student in my lab, he's like, we've got to take this to the next level to make it definitive. And so he put together a lot of different studies from different parts in the States, so we would have more than 10,000 people, give us a more definitive answer as to how and when cognition, executive function, these ability to make decisions become adult-like.
And so what did you find? You said 18 to 20, but it can be even later for some people, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always going to be variability. I think the important aspects of our results are that, number one, there's so much accelerated growth when you're a child.
Right.
Then when you're an adolescent, it kind of slows down, but it's still improving. So that's when the brain is like, we got to be very specific as to what we're going to do. And then start to stabilize around 18 to 20. However, there's a lot of variability, and depending on, how your emotional and affective system are changing, that could vary.
And did you break this down into different age groups as well? Like 10 to 15 I have here, and 15 to 18? Right.
So that's right, like 10 to 15, it is, a very high trajectory of change and growth.
Right, puberty.
And then, but then when you hit puberty into 18, it slows down. It's like, right now you're like, okay, I have access to this. How do I refine this?
And let's talk about the cognitive growth chart that you developed. Can you tell us more about this, why this is so important?
Well, we haven't developed it yet. Now we're at a place with this study that we could do this. And what we want to do is something similar to when you take your kid to see the pediatrician and they tell you, oh, look, according to this growth chart, their height is 20%.
Yeah, they're in the 20th percentile.
Yes.
Right, yes, we get that all the time.
We need to do that with cognition. Not because we want them to be the highest cognitive person, but because if we follow it and we see if they're following a trajectory, no matter where they are, they can be high or low, it can really tell us about the health of brain development and about risks that could talk about mental illness emerging. And then you could have interventions to help ameliorate those risks.
Talk about that a little bit, because I think that as we found, and we're being so much more open and talking more about mental health, this is such a huge topic right now. How will that play into it?
Well, the thing is that across different mental disorders, one thing that is always affected is cognition. So, and it's not that it characterizes them, they can still make decisions, but it's, in all these tests, they're not doing well, which speaks to certain things that are occurring in the brain. And this is a way to sneak in and look at the health of the brain.
This is so fascinating. And I know you're still developing that. Do you have any kind of timetable when that might be available, or what
No,
next with it?
it could be, yeah, I'm not going to put a timetable.
and that's absolutely fine. Yeah. I'm wondering for myself. I need to know this because I think it is so important. We get height and we get weight at the pediatrician, but you're right. There's nothing on the brain development unless a parent brings it up.
Yeah.
How will these, do you think, this information inform parents and their decisions and even their education later on?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to parents, there are a couple of things that I tell them. That brain is already very much there. It's refining. So when you're telling your kid this and they're like, Mom, I don't want to hear it, your brain is hearing it. So don't give up.
Yeah.
Continue to tell them. And just realize that in a setting that is calm with another adult, they can engage those systems at adult levels. So what we're talking about is, how consistent are you? That goes into 18. But at 15, 12, and so forth, if you have a nice mellow talk, they can access it.
It's fascinating. I know you're doing so much good work. Thank you so much for being here today and telling us more about the results of your study.
Happy to.
Fascinating stuff. If you're interested in learning more about the study of adolescent development at Pitt, we're going to have a link on our website.